Welcome to this month's episode of Chopping Wealth. I'm Brian Portnoy, CEO and founder of Shaping Wealth, and today's special guest is an old friend, Jeff Kreisler. Jeff, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. Good to see you. Been too long.
It's been way too long, as we were saying before we hit record. Um, Life's a little bit crazy and doesn't seem to be getting less crazy. So we do what we can. Um, Tell everybody who you are. You've got a really interesting perspective on wealth management and behavioral finance in your role at JP Morgan. What do you do?
So at the moment, my official job, my day job, I still like to say, is I am the head of behavioral science for JP Morgan. Technically, I'm the global head, and as I realized about 3 or 4 months ago, we don't have offices on any other planets. So technically, I'm the galactic head of behavioral science. And you're welcome to use that in your own lives. I think everyone here should recognize we have a special place in the universe. Um, I there's a lot to dig into what that is and what I do. I'll for this beginning, I'll say I sit in the private bank part of JP Morgan. JP Morgan's about like 350,000 employees. And the private bank is the part that serves wealth management for the ultra high net worth. That's sort of my primary client, if you will, but I work across the bank, providing consultation, advice, insights, tips, techniques. But yeah, that's the short version. I'm sure we'll get into more detail about what that means.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna click for details. So your background's interesting and different. Usually different often means interesting. Like me, you have a pretty non-linear career to end up in your current seat. Law career, comedy career, lots of stops along the way. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got here, including a pretty serious set of writing and research efforts in the field of behavioral finance, applied behavioral finance.
Sure, happy to, and I have self-justified everything by creating a through line through it. So I'll get to that at the end. And I'll just say, like as you've probably recognized, there is this interesting generational thing with people in the behavioral science field. There's folks of our age, let's say, who didn't have behavioral science as a class in college to study, and then came about it later. And now there's a younger generation of people that are studying and wanting to get involved. It's a fascinating field and challenge because I think you and I are amongst those trying to create the opportunities for the next. Anyway, so how I got here, semi-short version. In college, I studied a bunch of economics, politics, Russian studies. I went to law school, not to be a lawyer, but because I wanted to be Thurgood Marshall or Thomas Jefferson. Both those jobs were taken. Um, and then I moved to San Francisco, took the bar out there, and I started doing stand-up comedy. Um, the reasons why would be a therapy session involving being the youngest kid and having a little bit of um, we weren't rich, but I knew I could take some risks in my life, and I had that Princeton law degree as a fallback. Um, Comedy was focused on sort of politics, but not like, hey, did you see what happened in the news today? But like the way society has evolved and hypocrisy and all the intricate stuff. Um, and a friend of mine who was writing for Jim Cramer's TheStreet.com, so the Mad Money guy had a website, said, "Do you want to write a weekly humor column about business news for us?" I said, "That sounds stupid." He says, "We can pay." I said, "What a great idea." So I started writing that, and there weren't many people doing that, or any people really doing that sort of thing at the time. I got a following. For anybody that's listening that wants to write a book, I apologize for what happened next, which is that a publisher reached out and said, "Do you have any book ideas?" Um, and I did, and I wrote a book called Get Rich Cheating, which was a satire, to be very clear. It was like a Stephen Colbert meets Tony Robbins meets Jim Cramer, right? How do you be Enron? How do you be Lance Armstrong? How do you like be a Hollywood star or all this stuff? And that got into the hands of Dan Ariely, who I imagine your listeners are familiar with him. And he was working on his book about dishonesty at the time, invited me to speak to his class at Duke Business Students, which is its own interesting that like I went in character. He didn't introduce me as a comedian. Just here's someone with interesting wealth ideas. My whole shtick was like, don't have morals and ethics. You can make billions. No one gets caught. What's the big deal? And there was always like, I did it about 3 times. There was always like a little sliver of the class. It was like, he's got a point. I'm like, no, 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 that's you're missing the point. Um, anyway, so that was 2009, 2010. That was my introduction to behavioral science as a thing. I'd always sort of had this back in my head, like studying economics, studying law, like, yeah, there are rules and this is how people are supposed to behave, but that's not what people actually do. Which is part of why I kind of rejected being in the law and rejected doing traditional finance because it just something was a misfire. Um, with the benefit of hindsight, I look back and I see that, comedian goes, hey, ever notice people do this stupid stuff? And the behavioral scientist says, yeah, this is why. Or even if you include the law, the way that I approach things is I'll give myself the benefit and say, call it scientific, is I look law, comedy, and behavioral science. They all look at a situation, right? This thing happened, car accident happened. They try to break it down into its elements, like all the things that went into it. And then they tell a story about that in order to make a point. Comedian tries to get a laugh, lawyer tries to get his or her client off. And behavioral scientist, I believe, tries to say this is why it happened. Dot, 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 and what we can do to prevent it in the future, maybe. So that's sort of how I landed on behavioral science. And then with partnering with Dan, wrote a book many years later, 2017, Dollars and Cents, which, I having been in showbiz enough, I understand you get these moments when you have a little pop. And it's in 22 countries, bestseller that has very little to do with my name. In fact, if you look at the cover of the book, my great success was it says Dan Ariely and Jeff Kreisler. And I didn't say my name needs to be bigger than Dan's, but my name is bigger than the word and. And then to sort of wrap up in the landing here, I knew that I had sort of a skill set in, let's call it communications, and being able to speak, like I can tell political comedy jokes in a bar in West Virginia, and I can speak to CEOs, and I've written, speeches for the Democratic National Convention. So like so my skill was translated that. So I did consulting and speaking and sort of spreading the gospel of this field, which again, you and I are amongst that, not quite the leaders, I don't want to say, but, we're early. And like, why does it matter? Why does this matter to businesses, to families, to communities? And I ran that website, PeopleScience, which I'm not sure if that's where we met or not. But anyway, ran a website, which is one of the first that sort of talked about how to apply behavioral science. And then during the pandemic, when I had some amazing pandemic hair, which I'll see if I can find a picture. It was like this. JP Morgan reached out and said, there's an opportunity here. And I, of course, assumed it was like, come give a talk and that'd be great. But
That's great. So before we get into JP Morgan, let's talk about your partnership with Dan. What did you learn from Dan Ariely about the behavioral science?
In everything. I mean, I didn't really know this was an actual field, like I said, until I sort of just he reached out and I discovered his work and the work of his peers. Dan, when we worked on the book, we started in 2013, and he basically said, "Here is everything ever written on the psychology of money." Basically, was the original title, which of course Morgan Housel took that title. I said that should be the title of our book. They said no, not creative enough. Next, anyway,
You could have sold 10 million copies. Alas.
I would have had to have it be better written, but nonetheless, um, it was sort of like every research paper, every book, everything, and he said, go take some time, digest all this, and let's come and talk and figure out how we're gonna tell this story. He was very hands off, which at least initially, which was both a good and a challenge. The challenge for me was that when I create, when I write, when I speak, I need to get in this mindset of like I'm the expert, right? Like I know what I'm talking about. And I felt like initially I was writing for Dan, and that was really hard because I knew that he knew infinitely more than I did on this field. And eventually I can't remember exactly how it went down, but basically like I was slow playing it, and he said, "What's going on?" And I explained that. He said, "Just write it like you're writing for the audience, and it's not going to be public. Like I'll correct it," and he did. And so I wrote drafts of it, and he went through and marked it up. It was really good to think about, Dan's work was already very accessible. I think that was one of the reasons for his success in this field is that like he took complex stuff and made it so people could understand with storytelling, etc. So I also had a little like, what do I add to this? Because that's my thing. But he was very good at sort of helping me find the balance of when you need to dig into the details of how a study came out and when you need to just say this is the outcome of it and this is why it matters. Um, because we run the risk of here's of as you said before we started hitting record, like of oversimplifying is not really useful to people with if they don't understand it. But then you also on the other end run the risk of being too boring because you're talking about how many the p squared whatever. Anyway, so I thought it was insightful. You know, he definitely had his eye on how can we make a difference with this field, right? Like you could sense that he wanted to do something with it. It wasn't just let's get more research papers cranked out. It was like how does this make an impact on people, which I appreciated.
Right, right. And were there particular insights from behavioral finance, behavioral science that Dan leaned into where you also had your aha moments, substantive moments that sort of carry through into, and we'll talk about in a moment, the JP Morgan experience?
I think that there were, if you were to like look at the list of the traditional biases, loss aversion, endowment effect, all these that 80, and this is what I've actually found when I speak to professionals too. Like for me, 85% of it was like, oh yeah, I'd kind of thought that was happening myself, right? Over reliance on brand and sunk costs and other things that were sort of like back. And I was like, oh, and now I learned, oh yeah, that is actually a real thing. There's real foundation to it. I think that some of the stuff that maybe I had an inkling of, but it really solidified were um, things about fairness um, and what do you call operational transparency, right? Like show the work and people will overvalue it more than if you don't show the work. Thinking about at the time we were writing, the examples were things like Uber and Kayak, I'm not supposed to name brands, like those types of things that they show. Here's the progress bar when it was really an attempt to show that we were doing stuff, or open concept kitchens, right, where you see the work in a restaurant. Um, and that was like those were things that I had thought were happening, but I had sort of convinced myself was just my own bias or my own like delusion to think that people were tricking. I'm like, oh, actually, there is a science to this. And what I found interesting was I had written this book, Get Rich Cheating, which the satire was here's how you trick people, and then dollars and cents for me became the complement of this is how we trick ourselves, right? And so for me, like I love that interplay. But again, is that what did Dan provide that? No, he sort of led this horse to the water, and then I had to drink that. I never compared myself to a horse before. Thank you for this.
Hey, I'm just letting you roll. He's on a roll. Let him go. Um, some people will get that movie reference, most won't. I know you do. All right, so now you're the galactic head of behavioral science at the largest financial institution in the United States.
Bum, 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 bum. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. I don't know. Are you Darth? Are you a stormtrooper?
No, I'm Chewbacca.
You Chewbacca? Okay. Um, so what do people at the bank, I'm saying people, what do folks think behavioral science is at JP Morgan versus what it is you actually do? How do you what is your mandate? How do you describe what you do? How do you operationalize behavioral science? Because one thing I've watched from afar over the last few years, a little bit, is that you are in the operationalizing game. Almost to your point earlier, like you got to show the work, you got to see things getting done. And the number one criticism in our world, you, me, and people, the seven of us who do this for a living, um, is that behavioral finance is an abstraction. It's a list of biases. What is the relevance? We both worked with thousands of financial advisors over the years, and they say, okay, that's interesting, but what do I do with that? Clearly, you're doing something with that. So, what do you do?
I can tell you what I do. I can't tell you what the numbers of metrics and output are.
Oh, I don't care about that. But no,
You've identified the challenge, and I consider myself very fortunate that I'm in a place that gives me a little bit of slack, right? Like there's always every year, there's always demands to prove it. But there's also like the leadership here does recognize the value of, I hate the term softer skills, that this stuff that we do. That doesn't mean I have a blank check. The way I've approached it is, I sort of stole this from Charlotte Blank. Do you know Charlotte Blank? She was chief behavioral officer at Merritt's, which was the parent company that of PeopleScience. She's since moved on to other work. Anyway, what she had created there, and what I sort of made my own here, was this three-pronged practice: um, client engagement, advisor empowerment, I call it, and then financial innovation. Essentially external facing, internal facing, and then research. Now, where I was hired, the part of the bank that I sat in, and it fits my experience and what I did, it was more of that external communication and thought leadership, speak with people, and not really the research that I think my experience with Dan, others like research is really what this is. Um, and I admit it, I was very hesitant at first to go and meet with clients because you may have the same, like, this isn't therapy, it's not magic, right? I can't meet with someone and be like, oh, you have loss aversion, do this, right? Um, and in the end, what I found is that our clients, whether it was a meeting directly with a client or a family, or it was an event, or just thought leadership, they actually really appreciate this different perspective that you have also offer in your book and your work. That like it's not just how do I maximize this money, it's how do I like have a successful, fulfilling life, and how do I face these choices. Um, I have a family business, third generation family business that I want to sell. Like the numbers are great. Everyone says do it, but it's my legacy. It's my identity. It's my grandparents. It's this stuff that isn't on the balance sheet. And what I found in that space is that I gave people sort of a license to talk about this other stuff. Um, is that measurable? I don't know. I mean, we try to track it. Here we look at like how often do you do work with clients and what money flows and all that. But um, perhaps being in the private bank where it is much more relationship based than just purely transactional, right? We're not just the app and you can see flow. Like it's hard to determine. I can meet with someone and I get that anecdotal evidence. Hey, that was amazing. We want to give you all our money. Great, but realistically, it's part of like a holistic effort. So that client stuff is we try to look at it. Um, and it's interesting. I sort of call it like brand enhancement. Like we show that we're the bank that thinks about how you feel about your money, which we all should. The advisor stuff is more like getting advisors to recognize these different moments for their clients as well as their own biases, their own like, the advisor that has made 10 people rich off of a certain stock is going to keep recommending that stock, right? Um, their own confirmation bias and overcome all those things. And trying to create tools and simplify things. I'm not going to say oversimplify. I mean, I won't editorialize myself, but simplify, right? Like, because especially here, these are all brilliant people. And what I was pleased to find out was that all of them are also really the relationship people, right? We're not working on commission here. We're really care about our clients, and so they want this stuff. Some of them have, like me, with when I first sort of discovered the field, some of it's stuff they already have figured out on their own, and others is new. And like, hey, let's empower that. So how do I create tools or frameworks that are simple enough for them in their busy day, that every day starts with a morning meeting with here's a bunch of new ideas and an email like we have all this stuff to do. Um, and so that's been a process for me, and I try to get a few little shortcuts and things and try to strategize when to pop it in people's eyesight. And then there's the research part, which again, I wasn't hired for that. They don't really, where I sit, they don't really think of themselves as a research place. And so I sort of did it, off the side of my desk, if you will, that phrase of, I worked with Penn, University of Pennsylvania has a master's program, behavioral science, full disclosure, I'm on the board of advisors for them. Um, and we worked with their capstone and we did stuff. It wasn't like hard data-driven research of here access and let's test on people. It was more like a lit review and then qualitative interviews and like directional, but it showed the value of deeply thinking about this stuff. And now we're finally, after 5 years of sort of proving it informally, we're doing like one partnership with MIT research project, and I'm hoping that'll open the doors because, you know, as I said, my scale and what I love doing is talking about this stuff and having conversations, whether it's one on one or a group. But I know the value is in trying to actually prove here's what's really happening, not just here's what generally happens. And 52% of people respond to this. So that's what it's built on. How do I see that? It's in the end, unfortunately, it still becomes a bit anecdotal, proving it. You know, there's things like I create frameworks for people for certain conversations, and I hear it repeated by leadership or even by other like advisors who, I haven't necessarily told one on one, but they've heard it through the grapevine, if you will, or people. There are times when we have meetings with clients or events, and I've had a few clients just say, wow, I never thought about my wealth that way. Here's more of our money. Like that's a good, trust me, I forward those emails right on. Um, but it's, again, is that me? Is that the timing and they had a good breakfast that morning or were in a good mood or, um, so as I'm sure you very much relate, like, how do you show that? It's, for me, I think the benefit of having this three-pronged approach is like I'm showing there's work happening everywhere along, and it's all in this one general direction. And the last sort of, by the way, you've invited me on podcast, so I'm giving long answers. Were this a real conversation, you'd be in the works. So,
We got time. We have lots. Yeah, you hear the tape whirring in the back. I got lots of tape. I might need to change the film at a certain point. It's the big reel.
you can add interesting thoughts to buy me later, just like AI that.
Oh no, we got lots of animated thought bubbles that just will pop up in the post production. But no, go on. I got a bunch of follow-ups.
Okay, I'll just say I think that VH1's pop-up videos are like a lost like format that we should reemerge. Remember like they're on a date and it says like he's thinking about golf or any.
If we're gonna do a Gen X memory lane, I'm in.
Okay. The best generation. No bias there at all. I think what I was just wrapping up on was like it's been a slow, steady process here. I didn't have to like one of the reasons I accepted the job is I could sort of smell that I wasn't going to have to spend time convincing everybody to try it, but I've had to sort of prove it. And now, as I'm sure we may discuss in a few, like with AI and everything else, people are starting to realize more explicitly the value of not just having the information, but like how do people interact with the information? How do we make decisions? How do we do that? And that is the role of still people, at least for the next few years.
So I had an experience. Well, one reaction and then to a question. On the just called the ROI topic with behavioral science. I would call it generally pretty annoying because people want simple answers to very complicated questions. They want a monocausal explanation of a very complex reality. So, hey, did a behavioral science intervention lead to new asset inflows and more revenue for the firm? Okay, well, that's fine to ask, and we could model that, but it's a big multivariate problem to measure, and we'd have to structure experiences, A/B testing, control groups, test groups, long time periods. The thing is, the people who ask the question often don't really want the answer. They just want to move on with their day, and they want to know, oh, do you have a silver bullet? Great, let's get that into the mix.
I'll also say, if I can just jump on that, what I've come to see also is sometimes that is a nudge, if you will, to make sure that we are remembering the bottom line. Right? And maybe this is my own perspective that we're not just doing interesting stuff, but even if we can prove it's impacting, that's the direction we're going.
Right. Yeah. And anyway, as if we have reliable causal models on the more engineering or mechanical part of the business. So I had a conversation. One of our clients about 3 years ago was one of the largest private banks in the world, one of your competitors, and good engagement over the course of a year or so. A lot of the preliminary conversations with them, though, were so annoying because they reminded me many, many times how rich their clients were. And if I were to apply behavioral science of any form to their wealth management process, I needed to take into account, in case I forgot, how rich they were. So, you're at really a fantastic, high quality, ultra high net worth private bank. I'm sure the topic of the relationship between level of wealth and relevance of psychological factors has come up. And I'm guessing some of the bankers there who take care of billionaire families have certain perspectives on what you do. Can you kind of share your experience with that? I'll intervene just for a second and say my answer to this private bank was people are people, humans are human, and the way we feel about life, our values and our identity and our beliefs and our biases and so forth are not tied to the number in our balance sheet or checking account. So I'm not saying that's where I want you to go, but that's the experience I had with a set of billionaire clients.
So my approach is similar, and I'll give the bad news first, and it's small bad news is there are little pockets of people or functions here that still have this like white glove precious people approach. That's my version of saying what you're saying. Like billionaires are different. Um, my approach and what I've sort of found most people enter is they're people, but context matters. And I think that when I say context matters is something I apply to any sort of behavioral science. It's like we do all have these sort of human biases, but our context like impacts how those affect us. Right? We all have some level of loss aversion. I'm worried about if I lost $1,000, it would ruin my week month. Like it's if a billionaire loses $1,000, broadly speaking, that doesn't affect them the same way. But there's a number somewhere that is their equivalent. Similarly, I get asked a lot, and you may too, like, oh, these different generations are totally different people, or different cultures are different. And I'm like, the underlying thing's same, but like the different generation, the younger generation has the context of like, here's all the world's knowledge on your phone. And like, here is a life of growing up with the great financial crisis and all these other things where you've been told just work hard and everything will be fine. And that's been proven wrong. So that context is different. Which is just like a long-winded way of saying my approach is similar. It's like, look, people are people and there are differences. And what I would love to explore is can we identify in some way what is that, what is the context, what is the impact of having a level of wealth that means that you are sort of separate from our traditional struggles and the traditional pressures and stresses that most of us have, whether that's getting through the week or the day for some, or just planning for a secure future for your kids. When you get to the point where that isn't numerically as much a challenge, how does that affect your decision making? Now, as with you, I've met plenty of billionaires who are worried that they're going to run out of money in a year or two. And I've met plenty of people that have less than 5 zeros in their bank account and spend like they're billionaires. So it isn't the number alone isn't the context that changes things, but it changes things a little bit just because of the impact. And as you know, sometimes if that future impact of our choices isn't tangible, like it becomes harder to make a decision with that in mind. And so if you're making choices that lose you $1,000 and you never feel that, that may impact what you do. It's a bit of a roundabout way of saying, like, I agree they're not unique people, but the context has perhaps changed their incentives and the way that they make decisions.
So you touched on the idea of what you, it, in there was a comment or an idea about the future self, and you wrote a nice piece on your website somewhere. Can't remember exactly where it's nested, but we both know and appreciate the work of Hal Hirschfield and research on the future self. This idea that the more vivid and connected we feel to the future version of ourselves, the more likely we have a relationship with that person, the more likely it is we like that person, and the more likely it is we're going to make sound financial decisions about our future. So we, level setting on, we know that to be true. You've written quite nicely about that topic, and it sounds like you've applied that in client conversations. Maybe give me some more color on your approach to future self thinking and how you've applied it at the bank to with advisors and clients.
Well, I 1 billion% love Hal's work. And in fact, going back to your question earlier about working with Dan and sort of what, I can't remember how you phrased it, what surprised me or what was new, like discovering that there was like this idea that we think of our future self as a different person. Comes like, I was like, yes, and also what?
Yeah, yeah. No, it's trippy.
Yeah. Sorry, my screen just blanked out. So for everybody wondering what's happening, I am resetting my password. I love Brian Portnoy. Okay. Um,
I could see you fine, by the way.
uh, so the future self thing is the way that I'll use me as the pronoun, but it's really not just my effort. The way it's been folded in here, I think, is what we think about with goals-based planning or wealth plan, whatever the term of art is, which is that like think about what you want to achieve, think about your goal, and that like be very specific, right? To your point about making it tangible and visceral and like emotionally connected. It's not just I have $100 million and I want 120. It's like I want to buy a second home that I can spend time with my grandkids, Johnny and Mary and Bob. I want to let my daughter start a business because she really loves whatever her veterinary care. It's these really specific goals that you want to achieve with that wealth, which is a whole other conversation. That money isn't just a number. It's anyway. Um, and the idea being like we're more connected to whether you call it a goal or a legacy or a future vision, like that moves us, broadly speaking, to create a plan, perhaps more importantly, stick to a plan, and push forward to that. And it has proven immensely helpful to be able to show people with this wealth that on some level you feel like I'm fine. What's the big deal? Yeah, but if you move these levers a certain way, this goal becomes more visceral and real, and this one fades back, or this one does that. And like you see things in terms that aren't just bar graphs and numbers. They're like in what matters to you. And ultimately, ever those what matters to you is about what do you want for that future? Whether that like what matters to me is my kids' education are paid for, which is in 18 or 21 years, or it's my grandkids, they keep running the business, which is in generations and lifetimes. Like if we sort of put a name to that and then even more detailed to that, it becomes something that we're going to have that more that more visceral, real, stronger connection to that future self, so that the decisions we make now and as things become turbulent and hectic, are at least anchored somewhat to that future. It doesn't guarantee. No, there's no guarantee, as you and your listeners know. But like,
We play the odds. We play the odds.
well, more like if we have, like if we have a plan, however everybody defines it differently. I know you define it, different companies define it, but like if there's something that we're striving for, then as we're making decisions along the way, and it's not all up and to the left or right, whatever, we're more likely to stick with it, or to adjust to get back on track.
When you think about, and it's a common practice among wealthier families to have family meetings, so multi-generational get-togethers to discuss the family's wealth and sort of getting everybody aligned with not just the facts, but the purpose and the direction. When you think about what you've created in terms, and you used the term a while back, frameworks for conversations, in what way are you and your team intervening or shaping conversations among those families on the things that really matter to them? What are the different attachment points there for you?
We have a fairly robust, or growing, family governance practice that I sit in the same part of the organization with, and we're always working together, always sharing resources aligned. They come from the more technical side of like, here's how you create a family office, here's like what you need to think about with your trusts and all these other things. And I obviously come from the more psychological, emotional side, and we've come together. So sometimes, so as far as what my team is, I have a team of two only. So we're limited in how much we do things. They have a little bit bigger team, but we work together. Um, what I have found, and I think it's probably somewhat of a self-selection bias, but the majority of the clients who I end up meeting with them or their family, the we end up talking about some version of how do I make sure my kids aren't jerks, or how do I take care of my family, or how do I keep the family together, or we're in the fourth generation and some cousins are no longer talking. We want to bring, like, it becomes about family. Understandably, right? Again, what matters to you in the future isn't that number. It's like I want my kids to know their cousins. Um, so it comes up often. Uh, I think I mentioned the family advisory because it's hard to always distinguish what's my work, what's their work. But like together, we try to do things as concrete as like here is a starting point, sampled agenda for a family meeting. And here is a draft of what a family constitution might look like should you want to go there. And let's create your own. To talking about more like why it's important, and even circling back to this idea of your future self, like that we as whether we're generation one trying to set the tone for the generation two and three, like establishing the values of a family, the vision, the purpose of wealth, that the stuff that is often unspoken should be spoken so that people have this sort of common anchor. um, I just as with earlier things thinking about for advisors trying to simplify it to be useful, it's the same thing with families, with the big caveat that like if I knew how to make family harmony and unity perfect, like we wouldn't be this wouldn't be a Zoom call. This would be you and I at the White House, or uh, you know I was about to say the Hague, but that's for crime, so never mind. um, so there is so that it's offering guidance. I look at the work that again people like yourself are doing and others, because like none of us have the answer, but it's all sort of like here's an approach that recognizes that your wealth, especially in a family, again isn't just a number. It's coming together and having some sense of identity, goals, shared values, and legacy. And like there are many ways to approach that and put it into practice. Um, and trying to offer guidance.
Yeah, so it's a perfect bridge, I think, we've been talking a little bit about client engagement now, advisor enablement. I mean, they kind of go hand in glove, but what's been the reception as you've built out the practice among the advisors and wealth counselors there to frameworks on values, identity, beliefs, things that, some of these more hard charging bankers might think are a bit squish. Others might say, yeah, this is right in my wheelhouse. But sort of, as you've built advisor enablement tools, at scale at a big bank, what's generally been the reaction? And maybe what have you learned in terms of what's worked and what hasn't worked? What's the right way to engage advisors on these topics?
Generally, the reaction that I have heard, and obviously that's again self-selecting, it has been positive. There's a handful of super users, if you will, that like actively tell me, hey, that's good. What do we do here? And they reach out for questions, and it's wonderful. Um, I think, there's different levels of advisors. I speak to the new hires, and for them, I think it's useful in 2 weeks of training. That's all technical skills. So at least get an hour of like, don't forget you're also dealing with people. Um, whether those people are your peers or they're the clients. Um, I think that when I first started, it was a lot of sort of a listening tour to hear what's going on and what people actually do. We actually did a needs assessment where we did interview a bunch of advisors in different settings to try to hear from them what they wanted, what they needed. And I continue to do that and have that approach and say honestly, which is true, like this is new to be in practice, right? There's a very small, as you said, I think you said seven is a number. I don't know what the number is of us in this weird space that's not like help me design an app for my banking, but it's actually like have these conversations and so like I want to hear how it goes. And I have early on, I coming from my past experience, I sort of grew this group I call the Behavioral Council, which is an email and monthly office hours. And it's like, here, tell me what's on your mind. Hey, we have this framework for if people, object to our fees, here's ways to have that conversation. How has that worked for you? What hasn't? What have you tried? Um, I really enjoy connecting with the more senior, successful people here, because I'm like, listen, I'm not here to change it. I'm actually here to learn from you. And if you can pick up a thing or two from me, like you wouldn't be successful at this job if you didn't know how to behavioral science called by a different name. Um, so I think for the most part, people are into it. Day to day, sometimes we have hey, the market's down 7%. We're not worried about that today, or like, hey, things are smooth sailing. Let's talk this other stuff, but that's business.
Yeah, yeah. And how have you found the relevance of your work to the broader JP Morgan franchise, where you have a massive retail bank? And I know you said you focus mostly on the private bank, but when I think about the Chase enterprise and millions of customers there, people with the same biases, with the same decision challenges, how have you found the sort of proliferation of your insight, wisdom, tools, and such to that much, much larger group?
So one of the delusions that got me to accept the job was thinking about, okay, JP Morgan has this massive footprint, and it like I think it was some like half of Americans have some sort of account. It was like if I can do something that like decreases financial stress by half of 1%, like amazing impact. Um, I see, this is my, as I said, my main client is the private bank, but I do go around and I'll give talks internally, externally. I've tried to cultivate a situation where like anybody anywhere can come to me and I'll talk to them about it, but like I can't go and run an RCT and whatever in Columbus, but maybe I could connect you with someone who will. Um, it's always hard to flip that switch, but trying to share the insights. And there are definitely pockets and groups and lines of business that are like super more much very receptive to it, and they love it. A few have hired people to sort of even if they aren't called behavioral science, they've looked for people with that perspective, like our in our fraud prevention space. Like I did a little bit of consulting. I helped them design like one of their warning pages and said, try this out. And then shortly after, they hired like a person with a PhD in behavioral science who's been working on that. And that's great. I sort of think that my work has been legitimizing that behavioral science has a role in financial services and influencing people to have this lens be part of what they do. I'm preaching to the choir here, but I think like any business interaction or any like cultural development or internal, external, like having that behavioral science lens is important. Doesn't mean it's definitive, but like have that presence. And I think that over 5 years, it's now known across the bank that we have behavioral science, and different places with different budgets and different agendas might lean into it more than others. My ideal would be instead of a team of two, I've got a team of 12 with two or three of us in center, and the rest are deployed at different lines of business doing experiments and really on the ground. That's not where we are, but I'll take this and keep building.
What do you see as the challenge to the modern advisor right now? So putting the clients off to the side. I mean, the advisor remit has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. So many different tasks, technical issues, psychological issues. There's just a lot. And so you're out here training advisors effectively as behavioral coaches. What do you see advisors struggling with from a skills adoption point of view, from a mental health point of view? Like, where do you find resistance points, but also opportunities to teach and help people grow?
I think that, particularly as I think about younger advisors, not necessarily 22-year-olds, but like early in their career, they're building the book. It's like balancing this becoming a financial expert and becoming a relationship person and understanding what the client needs, and leaning into that because I think even let's travel back 3 years before AI became the hot bulldozer running over us.
Which is my next set of questions, but yeah, perfect.
Well, so we'll go before it is like even before that, like a lot of what we offer is here, right? Like a lot of the stuff is somewhere you can figure out, or if not on the phone and tech, like the ability to jump between a JP Morgan and I won't even name our evil competitors. To jump around is like and particularly if you think in this high net worth, ultra high net worth, like these are people I'm sure are getting calls every week. Hey, have you thought about moving your money over here? What can we do? So what keeps them connected to us? Like, yes, we have a really well-performing platform sitting in our new world headquarters. It's amazing. We're doing very well. However, it's not just a number. It's do they trust us? Do they think we understand what matters to them? Are they someone they can call and say, "Hey, my daughter wants to start a business and doesn't know," like just getting this other advice that isn't just the numbers. And so I think that the struggle for anyone, and not just advisors, and I wouldn't say specifically advisors here, is just balancing that technical expertise with that sort of executive function of communications and listening. And, I think it's a universal challenge that if you become really smart in something, like, and you enter a client meeting or a customer meeting, like, are you just talking to them or are you listening to them? And so again, some people, they figure that out, and others need a little, like, don't spend your time telling everybody how great you are. Just talk to them about what they need and adjust on that. Um, and I think that becomes even more of a pressure thing for people that are A, high achieving, B, every day have a, like, here's the hot new things today that you got to learn, and like just this constant environment, where you're surrounded by really successful, high achieving people. It can feel, oh, that's a conversation for imposter syndrome. But anyway, I think that's just the balance. And then, as I'm sure you'll hint at, when AI comes along and we feel like our jobs are at risk again, what do you lean into? Do you lean into, like, I'm going to become an expert, or I'm going to work on the relationships?
Yeah, so I am going to go there. And we've done a ton of work at Shaping Wealth on the topic. But I'm going to, as the bridge between what you just said and AI, you said the T word, trust, and we haven't actually zeroed in on that specifically. When you do what you do, in your role for training advisors, but then connecting with clients, how do you define trust, and how do you teach advisors to build and scale trust across their practices?
It's a great question, and it became the first. That was the first research we did with Penn's master's program. Was like, trust in the advisor-client relationship. What is it? And again, if we'd had the definitive magic sauce, this would be a much bigger meeting. But we got some insights, and it is really important, and it's going to be more and more important as the AI replaces a lot of the technical stuff. Um, and again, it falls into something that, like, a lot of people sort of get inherently, that that's important, but we can always give those people that are good at it a little boost, or those that aren't, a little bit of guidance. And sort of the oversimplification of it is, we two things. Two, one is, we looked at different stages of this relationship. There's building trust, there's maintaining it over time, and then there's, if something goes wrong, sort of trying to repair it. And a good financial plan, there's that big maintaining period when, like, you kind of don't do anything. It's not quite set it and forget it, but like, it's, things are steady as she goes. And just like a relationship, and I'm a month out of a month, no, a little less than a month from my 20th wedding anniversary. Like, you got to stay engaged, right? So anyway, that's me with my anniversary in the back of my mind, thinking about 20 years. But so we looked at the different stages, and there's different things, and the overall thing, and I'm not sharing any secret sauce, is at all these stages, like, who was it? I'm spacing on the name, but, like, if trust is built on ability, honesty, and benevolence, right? And we traditionally think that honesty is the most important part. But what we saw, not just in our research, but also looking at research and surveys from others, is that benevolence, thinking about the other person, matters just as much. My bias is it matters more, because that's what I'm selling, if you will. But, like, there's an interesting survey by, I forget who, I could follow up, but, like, looking at reasons why people chose a financial advisor, or why they left them. And, like, performance and return was right here, but equally was like, didn't return my calls on time, didn't remember my spouse's name, like, just gave me something that didn't have to do with me, that they should have known I wasn't interested. It's stuff that is like, are you thinking about this actual person, or are you selling product? And so when we think about how we convey to, I froze. Are you still with me? Okay. When we think about how we convey to our advisors about trust, it the oversimplification, and I'll use that word over, but the simplification is, like, don't think about yourself, think about the other person, right? Like what's in it for them, and, like, in ways that ideally don't really have to do with their bottom line, their number, but, like, why should they care? And it's something that it becomes like a subtle shift when you come in and you have this hot product, that's great opportunity to pause and say, like, what's on your mind? Like, how are you doing? And like, how can I help you? As opposed to like, here's a thing for you. Um, Again, I'm after 47 minutes of talking, my clarity may not be where it should be,
No, no, I'm tracking. Keep going.
but it's about thinking about the other person, um, and being willing to put aside. It's like we've heard in many different industries, I'm sure, just like if you go into a meeting and you have a plan, I'm going to talk about these three things, but you never talk about those three things, but the other person talks for the whole time and shares some stuff. That's a good meeting, right? And being comfortable with that, that in some ways is going to build trust because it's all been about that other person and what matter and that you're caring about them. Um, and so that's sort of the high level thing. We have if I think about the potential for AI, which you didn't exactly ask this question, but where I think of potential for AI.
And that's sort of the bridge. So yeah, so you landed on a good framework for thinking about trust. Now AI intervenes when you chat with Chat or Claude. It's like, huh, they kind of get me. This is a good conversation. The more it goes, the more memory it has. It's like, oh, okay, this feels comfortable as if I were talking to a friend, even if I'm very aware I'm talking to a machine. How are you thinking about that moment on behalf of the client where they feel comfortable there and the financial advisor is sort of off to the side a little bit, figuring out, well, how do they get back into the conversational flow?
Well, you've struck on the conversations that happen here all the time, thinking about IQ versus EQ is the hot term that we use around here. There's a few things I think about. One that sort of sticks in my back in my head was there was um, a, research at I think it was Harvard. I should find out. Harvard or MIT, something in Boston. Go Red Sox. Uh, we're terrible. About looking at how people use chatbots for therapy so much, which is probably like when I first heard about this, I was like, that's crazy.
Oh no, it's real. It's very real.
It is real, but like my old man Jeff was like, forget it. Um, but what's interesting is two things. One is they said people. One of the attraction was there was no judgment, right? You could tell this bot like, hey, I'm feeling this way, and there was no. And even a therapist, you might feel like you're being judged. Um, and sort of related to that, where I think is the still the existing opportunity for humans is that the connection was broken, that trust, if you will, that sharing was broken as soon as the bot tried to empathize, tried to say, I know how you feel, because the robot doesn't know how you feel. And I think that there's still a space for people in every industry, and you can stay focused on financial, to say, I know how you feel. Um, and what that means in practical terms is what we're trying to figure out. But like understanding the person, understanding that emotion, which again, when you're selling the family business, it's not just what's the best deal. It's like, for generations, if someone says, what do? You say, have the most soybeans in Lithuania. What are you going to say you do in 2 years? I don't know. Like, what's your identity? How are you going to feel about that? That is a space where I think there's still a role for people. Now, maybe a good chatbot eventually figures that out. Um, but but there is an opening there, especially for people that value that the human interaction and the trust. Like it is, can you trust AI? Right? That to me, that was where I was like, I would never do therapy with a bot. Not that I don't do therapy, but like I would never do.
A lot of people do.
I know they do. So it's hard for me to like. These are personal perspectives, not data-driven insights about where that space is. Um, but I when I think about particularly back to the clientele, the high net worth, ultra high net worth that have a lot of options with their money, and most of them are going to grow their money. Um, Understanding what they're comfortable with, what suits their goals, what they want, what others like them have done and the outcome of that sort of social proof, if you will, is still a space for people. Yes, you could probably train bots to do that, and people probably are somewhere else in this building. Um, but I don't know. I think it's important for all of us to start saving as much money as we can for the days of. I look for like there are all these massive buildings in New York. The other day, I was like, these are going to be great buildings for like water slides and like entertainment when there's a mass of just people unemployed hanging out.
Right, right, right.
Too dark a future.
It's a dark future. I mean, I'll read Jamie Dimon's comments every now and then because he's in the press a lot, but the general within the wealth context, within the private bank context, what is the uh, what is the relevance? What is the path of AI in the wealth management process? How are you guys thinking about it currently?
So I cannot speak, as I should have said to the start, I don't speak for JP Morgan.
Okay, yeah, understood.
But my perspective is, and to the extent that I am involved in any of these decisions and um, projects, is it is still very much thought of as a tool to help us do our jobs better, not a tool to do our jobs. It is not, we're not building stuff to go direct to client as much as we're building stuff so that we can focus on that relationship stuff, so that we can focus on connecting to the clients, so that whatever, you wake up in the morning and tech stocks have dropped 7%. Like being able to have some computer process who in the past has acted in a certain way when tech stocks have dropped 7%. And so these are the people you should reach out to and have a conversation. Doesn't replace the conversation, but it helps us do some of that like background work and sorting through and like can pull up all the numbers for us to then do that. So my experience here has been it's how do we lighten our load so that we can focus on what we believe is our secret sauce, which is really understanding people and their goals and what they want.
Just wrapping up, last question, kind of putting you on the spot, but why not? You're an improvisational comic.
Yeah, sure. I've already probably said too much.
You've got 5 minutes with the top bankers at in JP Morgan's in private bank. You want to deliver sort of a decade, 15 plus years of behavioral wisdom into just something concentrated and punchy. The one or two big takeaways that you'd want to communicate to those folks in order for them to better impact the lives of others. What would your big message to those folks be?
Uh, that's a really good question. I would start with saying you're doing a great job. Um, and I'd say that not just because it's my job, but also people here, I've been impressed by how I've been surprised. I'll be honest that it's so focused on like the relationship side of things, not just the numbers. Uh, I would say there's a lot I'd want to say. I'd want to have some version of um, focus on the other person uh, and sort of keep it simple, stupid, KISS. Like let's we understand the complexity, but my belief is that when a client meets with a financial advisor or any sort of professional, they don't want to leave that meeting knowing everything that you know. They don't want to become an expert in finance. They want to leave that meeting, turn to their partner, and say, "I feel good about that. I trust her. We're in good shape." Some version of that, and we I can't speak for what people. I think people in general can lose sight of that and feel like they've got to prove their expertise. Um, and so I would say, especially as AI will complement or potentially replace the expertise, like focus more on like what's going to make them say, "I feel good." And it's not again what I'm happy here. It's not about fooling them. We're not selling them used cars or cigarettes. We're selling them like we're selling them pursue your goals and pursue what matters to you. And so how do we make all that expertise fit into something that they understand serves their happiness and their goals and their success, defined not by a number, but by something else.
It's great. Jeff Kreisler, this was wonderful. Are there ways for the audience to track your work, read what you're writing, things like that?
Yeah, uh, at Jeff Kreisler BS on for behavioral science. On Twitter, LinkedIn. I have a website that I don't upkeep that much, but it says where I'm speaking. I have a mailing list. You can always reach out, and then of course go search for Jeff Kreisler at JP Morgan for whatever I publish there. Um, I used to be much when it was just the showbiz stuff. I had much more active platforms, but I'm old and tired. I don't have time to update everything.
Yeah, yeah, not probably a lot of nights, late nights these days at the Chuckle Hut or Zanies.
No.
All right, Jeff, thank you so much. This has been you bet. This has been another episode of Chopping Well. Thanks for stopping in, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.